We're going to talk about whales and all sorts of stuff today, but mostly about whales and stuff and how they interact with the Atlantic Cup race course. So the Atlantic Cup race course starts in Charleston, South Carolina, and goes to New York City, New York Harbor there, and then on up to Portland, Maine. And I've sailed it a couple of times, and I don't remember really crossing paths with any whales, but what kind of species of whales might us sailors see as we make that course up the eastern seaboard?
Hi, Dave. This is Ann DeMonte over the Audubon Society of Rhode Island, and I am the director of our Nature Center and Aquarium in Bristol, Rhode Island. I'd be happy to answer that question. I'm like you, I'm a sailor myself, and we don't always see whales when we're out there, but they are there and we need to be aware of them. There's over 90 species of cetaceans around the world. Cetaceans are whales and dolphins. That's a classification or name for them, cetacean. But along the Atlantic Cup race course, there are many different whales they can see, but there are 5 main whales that we recommend that people look out for. And those include the minke whale, which is a small whale, only about 20 feet. There's the humpback whale, which most people are very common with, know well. Bob's going to put up a slide for us. So there's a humpback whale and a minke whale shown there. Humpback whales are usually the whales most people see when they go out on a whale watch. Then there's the fin whale, which is the second largest whale in the world after the blue whale. And then there's a very special North Atlantic right whale, which is that sort of fat, chubby whale in the middle of the screen with a white belly patch and the callosities over the eyes, so these patches over the eyes. And we're going to be talking about that more because it is one of the most endangered whales in the world. And then, of course, there's all kinds of dolphins that they can see, and all different species of dolphins, such as the common dolphin, which is that image that you're seeing in the lower corner with the sort of yellow and white and gray patching. So, so those are a little bit of the whales that you may commonly see along the east coast of the United States where the Atlantic Cup travels. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that migration and why it's important to know about those whales traveling.
Okay, so that's kind of cool. You know, the dolphins are always a lot of fun to see when I'm out sailing. I would be out in the middle of the ocean sailing around the world where I've been out there for maybe 7 or 10 days, and you sort of get this lonely feeling, and all of a sudden you look out and there's a whole bunch of dolphins playing around with you. I remember sitting there one day thinking, gosh, how cool would that be to just have this entire ocean as your playground? Like, you could go anywhere you wanted to in the world if you just kept swimming, right?
That's true. That's very true.
Good fun. And then I realized, well, that's kind of what I am when I'm on a sailboat. I can go anywhere in the world. So now whales migrate, like birds migrate, I guess, and people migrate, so like that. Birds, I know of birds to migrate because it's wintertime and summertime because I live in the northern hemisphere, but whales migrate for the same reason?
Whales migrate for a variety of reasons. The most commonly accepted reason is the fact that they're going to be leaving an area that's cold and going up to an area that's warm so they can go and feed. And that certainly is the case with the North Atlantic right whale. And then, of course, at the end of the feeding season, a lot of animals will then move to somewhere colder. They're going to leave where they are because it's going to get cold, and they're going to go to somewhere warmer. That often means they're going to a different kind of ecosystem, which is not going to have enough food for them. And that's certainly the case with right whales and humpback whales along the East Coast. So they'll end up in the tropics, they'll end up off the coast of Florida and Georgia. So they won't be doing much eating while they're in those warmer spots. And I should point out that it's baleen whales that have a pretty typically anticipated pattern of migration, whereas the toothed whales, the dolphins, and the porpoises just tend to roam. There's a couple of exceptions, and there's this interesting new idea that's just been published that there's some of the orcas in the Southern Ocean that are hanging out down by Antarctica will actually migrate where it's warmer because it helps them molt. Because when they're down where it's cold, they're keeping the blood away from their skin, so they're not shedding the way that they normally do. They're mammals, just like we are, so they would shed, but they'll go somewhere warmer, shed quickly, get all new skin. So that's a new hypothesis that's just been published. And we also know that there are some belugas that head down from Canada, northern Canada, down to southern and mid Canada, and they do that as well. They just go there to molt. They're not even going there to breed. So that's the general gist of why these animals migrate. It's either to get to food they wouldn't normally get to breed, because you got to have baby whales, or they're going to go somewhere warm and their feeding area is going to get too cold and there won't be any food. Or in some cases, now we think they're actually going to help shed quickly and get new skin. Interesting stuff.
Well, that's cool. So you mentioned the right whales, and you also mentioned the beluga whales. I remember seeing beluga whales when we sailed from Quebec to St. Malo. So we were going out to St. Lawrence Seaway. They were almost magical. But the right whales, now, they migrate across the Atlantic Cup racecourse, I think. And why are they called right whales, and what's important about their migration path and our course? I think Anne said that they were some of the most endangered whales.
Yeah, so ironically, the North Atlantic right whales are migrating across the same time frame and area as the Atlantic Cup route. So competitors in this event are especially likely to come across right whales as they're traveling. And one of the more interesting things that's happened as of late is that we've started to see right whales use some new areas. So generally they're following the track from warmer water in the winter to colder water in the summer. So heading south up north in the spring. And what you can see here is a comparison that we put together for the last Atlantic Cup race in 2018, showing the Atlantic Cup course next to all right whale sightings during that same time frame. So covering the month of June. Every black whale tail that you're seeing on the map on the right there is a whale sighting, a right whale sighting. So they are starting to head north in that month of June. But the more interesting thing, again, as of late, is that they're kind of also using different specific habitats. So where we know that they come into Cape Cod Bay in the spring and then head up into Canadian waters towards the summertime, especially in the last year or so, we've seen an increasing number of right whales hanging out south of Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard, which was an area that we had seen them previously, but not in the numbers that we're seeing more often now. So as the temperature in the water is changing, whales are having to go into some new habitats to find the food that they want to eat. And they are very picky eaters. There's a particular type of zooplankton called copepods. So if anybody is familiar with SpongeBob SquarePants, there's a character on there called copepod. I forget his actual name. It's been a while since I've seen it, but there is a character based off of a copepod, and that's what North Atlantic right whales eat pretty exclusively. So they have to follow their food source. So as the ocean temperature is warming and those copepods are moving into new areas, we're going to find the right whales there as well. So again, they're still generally following the same northern migration in the spring and early summer, but starting to use some different habitats. But these are all areas where the Atlantic Cup route is actually traveling. So the odds of a sailor competing in the Atlantic Cup seeing a right whale are actually pretty good.
Well, that's pretty.
Sheldon J. Plankton.
Sheldon, that's right. Thank you.
That's really interesting, and the you know, as one of the things that's very important to 11th hour racing and the Atlantic Cup race as well is sharing with young students and stuff the importance of sustainability and taking care of our environment and the effect it's having on climate change. And we're seeing more and more tangible or you know, obvious effects of climate change. And you're saying the right whales are starting to feed a little bit further south. They're being driven by climate change. Is that what I'm understanding, Monica?
Yeah, so interestingly enough, they're traveling further south and also further north in different areas. So here, where I am in Massachusetts, they are hanging out a little bit further south. We'll still see them in Cape Cod Bay, which is an expected habitat for them, but then south of Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard. But then once they head into Canadian waters, they're being seen more often in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, where they used to be found more in the Bay of Fundy. And so the Gulf of St. Lawrence is a bit to the north of the Bay of Fundy. So they're spreading out from where it was more of a centralized area. They're heading both further north and staying further south.
Well, that's obvious indication of the climate changing, the temperatures changing, their food source moving with a change in water of the temperature of the water of the ocean, and they follow the food source. And so, I mean, for a long time in American history, and actually the whole world, whales were hunted for their fat and the oil to run lights and lamps and things of that nature and all that stuff. And a good friend of mine told me at one time that nowadays we have about 10% of the population prior to the commercial whaling. So why are whales so important that we should care about them?
So this is a great question. And in my opinion, there are many reasons why we should care about whales, but there's one in particular that is really, really important, and not a lot of people know about it. And I love talking about it, and it has to deal with whales basically going to the bathroom in the ocean. So it's not something people tend to spend a lot of time thinking about, but it's a really important process that happens out there. So believe it or not, we actually rely on whales pooping in the ocean to give us oxygen that we need to breathe. And the way that works is there are tiny little microscopic plants that live in the ocean. And as anybody who's familiar might know, that plants need sunlight to produce more plants. So in the depths of the ocean, you're not getting a lot of sunlight. So these ocean plants tend to congregate or hang out at the surface or near the surface of the ocean. And so you get these dense patches of ocean plants. And when whales are pooping in the ocean, they have to do this either at or near the surface of the water as well, because of the pressure. The farther down in the water you go, there's more pressure, and they actually can't go under pressure. So they happen to be relieving themselves in the same areas and parts of the ocean as we find these patches of oceanic plants, which, by the way, are called phytoplankton. So you can see that across the top of this infographic here. And when the whales are pooping, they are releasing nutrients back into the water. So they are very good at cycling these nutrients. Sometimes they're actually bringing nutrients up from the depths of the ocean back up to the surface, and again, just making them more available for this phytoplankton. And because the oceans cover about 70% of our planet, that means about 70% of the oxygen that we breathe is coming from these oceanic plants. So plants are giving us oxygen to breathe, and whales are giving the plants in the ocean the nutrients that they need to reproduce.
Well, that's interesting. And so that's a lot like your garden at home, where you use fertilizer to make the plants grow. And as the plants grow, that creates oxygen from the photosynthesis. And so, well, so as we close out here a little bit, I'm sure each of you has a really interesting fun fact or something that's really special to you about whales. Give me a fun fact that each of you really love about whales.
So sure, I'd like to go back to something that we started with the name cetaceans, which means the group of animals of whales and dolphins. But what a lot of people don't know is they say whales and then they say dolphins, but actually dolphins are whales, which people don't know. They're small toothed whales. Just like a sperm whale is also a toothed whale. So when you're talking about whales, such as the North Atlantic right whale, which is, I'm sitting in front of our North Atlantic right whale model here at the Audubon Society, so that's the large creature you see behind me. This whale has got baleen, and dolphins have got teeth, and they use that either their baleen to either filter food out of the water or their teeth to grab food out of the water. So when you say whales, you're including dolphins in that terminology. So dolphins are not a separate type of creature. They're all under the umbrella of cetacean.
Cool. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Do you know that, Franklin? Franklin seems to think he knows everything. I suspect he probably did.
You're right.
How about
so
you,
that's
Bob?
my fun fact. Yeah.
Bob or Monica, have you got something fun to talk about?
Yeah, so I always like to talk about how whales sleep. And it's a question that I get a lot when I visit schools and students start to think about how whales are similar to us as humans. And whales do sleep, but they do it a little bit differently than we do. We call that actual behavior of them sleeping or resting, we call it logging, because they kind of look like just a log floating on the surface of the water. So whales are what we call voluntary breathers, which means that they have to stay awake and think about every single breath that they take, which is actually different from us as humans because we're constantly breathing all day, every day, and we don't have to think about it. Our bodies just know to do it. That's not the case for the whales. They have to stay awake enough that they are actually thinking about breathing, so they remember to do it. So when they're logging and resting like this, they're staying at or near the surface of the water so that when it is time to take a breath, they're not using a whole lot of energy. And essentially what they do is they rest half of their brain at one time. So they're not moving very much. They're only staying awake enough to think at a very basic level and to remind themselves, okay, it's time to take a breath. And again, because they're near the surface of the water, they don't have to move too far in order to take that breath. So this allows them to rest. We don't really know exactly how much over the course of a day they need to rest. It might depend on what they happen to be doing. But what we do know is that it is really hard to see whales when they're logging like this. So it definitely puts them at risk for any vessels that are traveling nearby, whether it's a large ship or a small boat. I've been out on the water plenty of times, and you can't really see from a very far distance when there's a whale resting because they're very discreet, they're very difficult to see. So it's a very important part of their day-to-day life to be able to get that needed rest. But unfortunately, it also can be pretty risky for them too. So it's not only a fun fact for me, just how biologically it happens for them to be resting, but I think it's also important for anyone who's out on the water to be aware of that too.
That's really interesting. So, I mean, Franklin here, he's constantly telling people he knows more than I do. So the next time he yells at me for not knowing something, I'm just going to say, well, half my brain was asleep. So I didn't. That was the half that had the answer. But so, Bob, you got you run the Whaling Museum. That's got to be a fascinating place. You must have some interesting facts about whales too.
Sure. And one of the things that I find the most interesting about all 88 species of whale, dolphin, and porpoise is how reliant they are on sound for making sense of their world. We certainly have a much better ability to use our eyes, and some of that has to do with the fact that sound waves move 4 times faster through water than they do through air, and light waves tend to dissipate fairly quickly. After about 600 feet down, there's no light waves getting through at all. So these animals will use sound to really get a sense of what's happening around them. And I'm going to share an image here of a sperm whale head. And this illustration was created by one of our docents. And this does a great job of showing how something like a sperm whale and the other 73 species of odontocetes, those toothed whales, use sound when they echolocate to either find food or navigate, because they don't want to bump their heads on anything when they're swimming through the water. So they actually create the sound in their heads, and all this, the organ up here, in sperm whales there are 2. In most animals it's just 1, and it's similar to this, called a melon. It takes the sound waves, these clicks, these whistles, these grunts, magnifies them, sends them out into the water. Then, as you can see by the red arrows, the sound gets received through their bottom jaw. The back half of it's hollow. There's a waxy fat pad right there. It focuses, the sound goes into their ear bones, which are outside of their skull. Ours are inside, and then it gets processed by the brain. And all this happens faster than I can tell you about it. And the baleen whales, they also use sound as well, to communicate, but it's these toothed whales that have the extra ability to echolocate. So it's really important for us to minimize how much noise we put into the ocean, because we're having an impact, or can have an impact, on how they communicate. It's the difference between us having this conversation like this versus us all standing outside by a busy highway and having to shout at each other.
That's really fascinating, and I know we've heard in the news reports that there's a bit of concern with the sonar and stuff that ships use and all that stuff, and how that might be affecting the communication of whales and dolphins and stuff. So just a real quick question here before we get too long here, but Bob, can whales talk all the way across the ocean to another whale? Can they talk from, say, the United States all the way to South Africa or something like that?
Well, certainly we know that blue whales can. They have a very, very powerful, long traveling sound. And if there's nothing else in the ocean masking it, and they get into this interesting channel in the water called the SOFAR channel, they literally can, communicate all the way across the Atlantic Ocean. But it's a
Wow,
very, very low infrasonic sound that we can't hear, but the whales can. That's really all that matters.
fascinating. Well, you guys, this has been really great. I could talk for another hour about all this stuff, and maybe we'll get a chance to do a few more interviews like this, and we can,
Great.
talk more about things. Anybody got anything last they want to say here?
Well, I thought we just want to end before we do. If folks want to learn more information, we have some recommended places people can go and look at. And we also like to say, keep in mind, going with your last questions, whales are really good at social distancing and talking from social distances. So we say, follow what the whales do. But if you want to learn more, of course, if for our younger audience, you should always ask your parents before going online. But some great places we recommend that we know you can get really accurate information about whales. Bob, Monica, and I are part of a bigger group called the North Atlantic Right Whale Consortium. And their website is showing on the screen right now. The consortium is a group of scientists and conservation and environmentalists from Florida all the way up into Canada who are working to protect the endangered North Atlantic right whale. So that's a great place to go. We also have a Facebook page that you can follow called Facing Extinction, the North Atlantic right whale. So you can join us. And Monica monitors that. She does a great job on posting all kinds of fun things. As part of that, we also have the Sharing the Seas, safe boating for sailors and whales. So sailors can learn about how they can be better at helping to protect whales and also protect themselves. If a boat hits a whale, can be a lot of damage to that boat and can be very dangerous for the sailors on board. So it's protecting not only the sailors, but the whales as well. And then, of course, all of our websites, the Audubon Society of Rhode Island, the New Bedford Whaling Museum, and the Whale and Dolphin Conservation, all have wonderful information on our websites. And a lot of our organizations are pushing out more virtual online things that you can do at home. So we welcome you to look at any of those sites. And, you can reach us through any of those sites. So if anybody has individual questions, you can reach out to one of us, and we'd be happy to try to answer more questions for folks.
Great. Thanks so much, everybody. We really enjoyed this. We got to do this again. There's so much more fun stuff to learn. So thanks again. We appreciate it.